What I hope you've taken from this course is that the present state system is a real block, an insurmountable barrier when it comes to taking society forward. The state uses its political power over the rest of society to uphold the economic status quo. The fate of the present state is, as we have seen, tied in so many ways to another powerful socially embedded force, the capitalist economic system. Neither can free itself from the other's embrace. Sure, the relationship has undergone changes as capitalism itself developed into a global system, but the fundamentals remain the same. That's the reason why climate change and species loss remain a serious threat to our very existence. No state is going to sign up to an effective agreement that undermines profit and competition. Output and consumption must increase year on year, or share values fall and profits decline, along with tax revenues. The fact that the process is destroying the planet is pushed to one side. This is not just short-sightedness, it is a built-in madness which the capitalist state is powerless to deal with. As more people become disillusioned with politics and take to the streets to try and influence governments and states, the shutters are coming down on dissent. As previous sessions have shown, authoritarian and populist rule is gripping many countries. Democratic freedoms are disappearing. War between capitalist states is a growing danger. The old system is dying, and it's up to us to move history on and give democracy a new content and significance. The system's decay, particularly during the neoliberal period, has had real-life consequences. Some of the most critical ones are listed here. Before the pandemic struck, there were an estimated 3.2 million people in insecure work in the UK, including those on 0-hours contracts, agency work, and low-paid self-employment. The numbers have undoubtedly risen during COVID. Researchers found that this group of workers suffer from higher levels of anxiety and depression and are more likely to find themselves out of work than those with permanent jobs. Just as the pandemic struck, a devastating report revealed that health inequalities had grown sharply since 2010. This was the year when the coalition launched its deep austerity program, in which the neoliberal state made the most vulnerable pay for the bailout of the banks. The closure of children's centres, cuts in spending per pupil, reductions in adult social care, all combined with other factors to lead to a steep rise in poverty and inequality. In most regions north of London, life expectancy in the most deprived areas declined for both women and men, the report concluded. In 2016, it was calculated that the richest 10% of households held 44% of all wealth. The poorest, 50%, by contrast, owned just 9%. The top 0.1% saw their share of total wealth double between 1984 and 2013, reaching 9%. Meanwhile, in 1975, the share of national income related to wages reached a post-war high of 71.8%. From 1975, it went into steep decline and now hovers just below 60%. And 2.5 million households are dependent on food banks. Race inequality in England has deepened. A report found that black people are about 18 times more likely to be searched than their white counterparts. BME children make up over half of the child population in prison. This is an increase of 15% over the past decade. Had the white population experienced the same risk of death from COVID-19 as black groups, there would have been an estimated 58,000 additional deaths between March and May 2020. In 2019, the United Nations Environmental Outlook report concluded that unsustainable production and consumption patterns and trends and inequality were leading to a deterioration in planetary health at unprecedented rates. In February 2021, Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned that a climate change convention report was a red alert for the planet. He called on nations to raise their ambitions to limit climate change. In November 2021, COP26 in Glasgow ended with no firm commitments. So what do we want to achieve? What are our goals? I would argue that in broad terms, we should set our sights way beyond our present social system. Surely it's time to create a vision of the future that we can work towards, a vision that is democratic in the real meaning of the word, which brings people and power together. We would then create the opportunity to address the social and environmental challenges already discussed in a meaningful way. We cannot be said to live in a functioning democracy, given that resources, including land, technology, and many formerly public services, are in private ownership and run for profit, where a handful of powerful corporations control the mainstream media, and while the BBC, most of the time, acts as a mouthpiece for the state. It is a democracy in words only when inequality has reached unprecedented levels, and trade unions have few rights to mount effective strikes without facing punitive court action. It is a democracy for the few, not the many, when new generations are unable to afford housing because of exorbitant rents and soaring house prices, when the NHS is starved of resources and in the process of being privatised by stealth. We have to say that democracy is still out of reach for the vast majority in a system where women, black and minority ethnic communities, migrants and people with disabilities are targets for abuse, discrimination and super exploitation. So we should aim to create a non-hierarchical, non-elitist, genuinely democratic and accountable system of governing at community, town, regional and national level. Let's move from representation without power to power with representation. That would give society the capacity to end capitalist ownership and control of the economy and create a democratically run, not-for-profit sustainable system. There is more detail about what this could look like in the Let's Compost Capitalism course. We don't have to, nor should we, start from scratch in creating a true democracy. We should keep what society has achieved through centuries of struggle. In general terms, the rule of law, according to a former Lord Chief Justice, means that all persons and state authorities should be bound by and entitled to the benefit of laws openly made and publicly administered in the courts. This is about preventing arbitrary rule, arrest without charge and so on. It is constantly under threat from the Tory government. This doesn't, of course, mean that we should retain all existing laws. Those laws blocking trade unions from effective action and curbs on the right to demonstrate would have to be abolished. A People's Commission with expert help could consider what laws to keep and what needs to go. Naturally, we should keep all the democratic rights we have achieved through struggle, like the right to vote. They should be considered a minimum. Later in the session, we can look at extending our rights in both a democratic and social setting. Our common history is, as you know, deliberately neglected in favour of a partial, one-sided account. This helps to mystify the origins of the state and play down the role of people in shaping history. So we need to bring out the history of the levellers, the Chartists and suffragettes who fought for representation, and the immense struggles of the trade unions that go back over 200 years. Transparency is a word bandied about a lot, but seldom, if ever, apparent when it comes to policy making. There may be a nominal process of consultation, but responses are more often than not disregarded if they clash with already stated objectives. A whole region can oppose a hospital closure, for example, but the local health authority will simply press ahead. You don't want a train line through your back garden? Sorry, it's happening anyway. The present state is top-down, an alienating, impersonal power that sits above society, looking down at us. A real democracy would turn that relationship upside down. In place of top-down, we should create bottom-up administration involving as many people as possible in the process. There are some proposals for what this might look like further on in the session. We should repeal laws that allow owners of capital to exploit other people and planet for profit and banks to speculate with other people's money. Again, this would be the task of a citizens' commission to investigate and make proposals. There are two main options we can consider. One, try to make the existing system more democratic and responsive to the majority, who are effectively excluded from power. Or two, create a real democracy with new, people-centered forms of governance that value and incorporate past achievements. Many have concerns that the gains we have already achieved down the centuries could be lost in an upheaval and may feel that option one, which would mean pressing for reforms, is preferable. But is it realistic? Is the capitalist type of state capable of being reformed and made into something that will work for the majority? In my view, a transition to real democracy is actually incompatible with a narrowly based state that is predisposed towards capitalism. The present state cannot tame or control capital, even if it wanted to, because the economy operates through markets which are by their very nature beyond state control. The soaring rise in energy prices is a case in point. Existing state structures cannot become the servants of the people. Protest and pressure do not move or alter this fundamental conclusion. And neoliberalism, as we have seen, has intensified what has been described as the evacuation of capitalist democracy. That is why elections alone, which leave the present state intact, cannot provide the solution. The issues are too deep to be solved solely at the ballot box. Self-preservation means that the state will also block with all the means at its disposal the merest hint of a transfer of power to the majority. That is a lesson from history we would be well advised to heed. A state that is alienated from its citizens cannot, therefore, be made to work for society as a whole. You cannot vote capitalism out of existence. Option two is obviously a huge undertaking. It will involve mass social participation and creative practice over a sustained period. The old system will hang on to its power for as long as it can, so this is undoubtedly the hard choice, but in reality it is the only practical choice. The existence of undemocratic bodies at the heart of society and government should be addressed by creating a new, written, democratic constitution that places power in the hands of the people. How could this be achieved? Citizens-led conventions that reflect our diverse society and the different nations within the UK could be tasked with drawing this up, assisted by experts. This constitution would have to be carried into effect by people organised in assemblies, for example. These would constitute a network of popular power. They would have as their aim the dismantling of the present state and its institutions. New democratic bodies would need to reflect the power and control of the people. First past the post voting can never reflect diversity and encourage participation. The citizens' conventions would have to come up with alternatives and suggest proposals for mass involvement in the new democratic process through digital technology. Parliament, with its enormously rich history, could be made into a powerful democratic body in place of the poodle without bite that it has become. For example, a new kind of parliament could bring together citizens elected by local and regional assemblies where members can be recalled and/or re-elected every year. These are just proposals to get us going. Take a look at the other ideas on this slide and let us know what you think. Here are some suggestions for how we can build support for a democratic revolution. They are part educational, part campaigning. People are waiting. A survey published in January 2022 found that an astonishing 1/4 of the British public said a lack of faith in politicians is a big issue for the country. This is the highest level recorded since the survey began in 2016. I don't want to preempt an open discussion that we need to have, so I just wanted to make a few points to set the scene. Creating a transition from one political system to another is clearly an historic event. It's a break with the past, not necessarily a clean one, and the start of something new. These are essentially revolutionary acts. Liberal historians argue that in England there was a kind of evolutionary transfer of power from monarchy to parliament in 1688. Conveniently, they omit the civil war early in the century, in which Parliament's army defeated Charles I. The supremacy of Parliament had already been established long before the so-called Glorious Revolution later in the century. So while there was a certain degree of spontaneity at the beginning, ultimate success depended on plans and strategies. Parliament built the new model army. In America, the colonies called a Continental Congress to carry their fight for independence. The point here is that making the revolutionary transition from a capitalist state to a real or true democracy will require a strategy, a plan to succeed. These are some of the lessons from history. There are others we should take on board. As you know, the Russian Revolution that overthrew capitalism was rightly hailed as a key event of the 20th century. The idea of delegate-based Soviets or councils as the institutions of a new anti-capitalist power fired the imagination around the world. The Soviet Union's subsequent decay, dictatorship and dissolution in 1991 was tragic but not inevitable. We need to know what happened and learn the lessons. Finally, we will need a democratic organizational structure to coordinate and give perspective to our strategy. What shape that might take should be decided by research, debate and discussion. I hope this course has convinced you to take part in this exciting project, not only to rethink our future, but also to remake it.